Hello everyone, it's Shannon here, and welcome to Honeybee Stamps Holiday Wishes YouTube Hop. In today's video, we are going to create this holiday card featuring the new Amaryllis Lovely Layers Honey Cuts. So we're actually going to start with that Lovely Layers Amaryllis dies. There is this really handy guide sheet that comes with the die set, which is really great for figuring out how to put those layers together. We're going to start with the dies that create the flower. There's several dies in that set, and I'm going to go ahead and die cut all of them except for one out of some white cardstock. So here are all the layers here except for the final layer, which is like the little detail on the stamen. I'm going to start with the largest layer, which is the base layer for this flower, and ink blend it in fired brick, keeping it nice and flat, very easy, just ink blending with my foam blending tools, a base color there. Now I'm going to move on to Aged Mahogany, and I'm using a smaller blending brush. This is a Shader Brush 2. It's a kind of a linear brush, and it's going to help me create these stripes or striation on the petals. I think this adds a lot of detail and interest to them, and it's really easy to do with this blending brush. I am only adding the stripes to the parts of this die cut that have actual embossed areas or details that the die adds to the paper. You don't need to worry about the other layers or the other petals because they are going to be covered up with your additional layers. And now we're going to move on to the next two layers for this flower, and I'm going to ink blend these first with Candied Apple, a nice base, just like I did with that fired brick to the first layer. Once I get that base down, then we're going to add some stripes again. Now I'm going back to the fired brick because it's kind of a darker red, which will show up nicely over that Candied Apple, and I'm adding those striations to the petals to really add some more interest. And once this gets all layered up, you'll really see how beautiful that little bit of detail really enhances the look and really actually makes them look more realistic. So I'm adding a couple stripes to this petal here, and again I'm only adding these stripes to the petals that actually have the embossing on them that the die adds to them, because those are the petals that you'll see. Any other petal that's kind of completely flat with no details, they're going to be covered up, so you don't have to worry about adding details to that. And I also ink blended a little bit of the bottom of that second layer. Now we're moving on to these final layers here. I'm going to ink blend them first in Abandoned Coral, just a nice flat with that Distress ink, and then we'll move back to our Candied Apple again with that Shader Brush 2 and add some detailing, adding some stripes to this larger petal of the three, and then we'll even try to add a little stripe to that tiny one, and then the final one that's kind of like that's more linear and longer, I'll just add a little bit of that Candied Apple to the bottom, just to add a little bit more interest, create a little gradation. Now we're moving on to the stamen. For this base layer for the stamen, I'm going to simply ink blend it in Fossilized Amber. Once I finish with that, we're almost ready to put this flower together. We just have one more part to die cut, but I'm going to go ahead and put the layers together just because I don't want to lose anything. So I'm just using liquid adhesive, and I'm actually only trying to place the liquid adhesive at the bottom half of my layers. That way I can kind of fluff up the petals later after I finish creating my card together. You can see here on this layer I'm adding that stamen on top. It goes right on top of that base, and then I will layer that onto the flower, and then we have those three final little pieces here, and they will just line up with the bottom half of the flower. These I glue completely down because they're so small, and that little tiny one that almost looks like a tongue, that one's going to go right on top. So actually this one goes on top of that skinnier, longer piece. And again, all of you can figure out how to layer these up thanks to that guide. So that guide helps a lot. Now here's that last die here. This is the die for the detail on the stamen. I have some colored cardstock, and I'm just going to die cut them out of that colored cardstock just because they're so small and it'd be hard to ink blend. I do try to use white cardstock most of the time just so you guys can at home recreate this card as much as possible, because sometimes finding particular colored cardstocks can be tricky. So here is that finished floral. I'm actually going to repeat this whole process and create a second one, so we have two. With our two flowers done, I'm now going to move on to my greenery. I have the leaves here and the stems. I'm going to first ink blend all of them with a base of Mowed Lawn. Once I finish that, we'll move on to pine needles. And we'll be actually using that pine needles to kind of create some gradations over the leaves. That adds a lot more depth and interest, as well as adding some details, some stripes as well to the leaves. So here I am ink blending some gradations on those leaves with that pine needles. This darker shade really does help to create more contrast and you get more of a dramatic gradation. Once we finish with that, I'll move on to my shader brush 2. Again, it's that linear brush that we used on the petals earlier for the flower. And I'm adding kind of basically a vein down the middle of each one of these leaves, and this just adds a lot more texture and more interest, and very easy to do again with that brush. Once I finish with this cluster of leaves here, I'll repeat that process to that smaller leaf right there, and then we'll finish up with some aged mahogany. This red really kind of creates a really dark, even more contrast to that ombre, and I think it adds just a little bit more interest to those leaves. Now we're moving on to kind of this burlap sack that the bulb sits in. I'm going to ink blend all 3 of these layers first with scattered straw. Once I finish that, I'll move on to wild honey, and I'm using a different shader brush here. This is shader brush 1, and I'm using it just to kind of like ink blend along the edges to define the edges of these layers of the die cut, and that will just kind of make things pop a little bit more. So here you can see I'm ink blending the bottom of the burlap sack with that wild honey, and now I'm ready to kind of adhere these layers together, just basically one on top of the other. They all the little kind of pointy one here goes right underneath that kind of fold or bend over in the sack, and it's just a really pretty little I guess a little almost like a pot almost for the bulb. I really like that detail. And there's also in this die set, there's also a actual like pot that you can use instead. So now I'm going to ink blend the bulb first with a little bit of vintage photo to kind of create a little ombre look. And then I've grabbed a Copic marker here and I'm just kind of highlighting all of those embossed details in the die cut with that marker just to kind of bring them out and add more texture. Now for our background, I'm using the Holiday Wishes paper pad here. This just came out in this release. I love all the beautiful pattern papers. I chose something a little bit more subtle here because this is kind of a more of a cash Christmas card, and I went ahead and trimmed this pattern paper down to an A2 panel, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and now I'm just adhering it to the top of an A2 top folding white card base. Once I get that stuck down, we'll move on to assembling our floral or our focal point. First, I'm going to position this bulb in the sack. I toyed with the idea of putting it top down, but I decided to go from the bottom up. It just looks a little bit more nestled in that way. And yes, the die cut does have, in both layers, does have that slit for the bulb to fit inside, which is really cute. Now I'm going to move on to assembling or adhering the stems to the leaves. And I have 2 stems here, obviously, for both of my flowers. And I want to make sure that they're kind of split a little bit so the flowers have room on my card front. Then I'll go ahead and adhere my stems to the bulb. And then we have that final petal, or final leaf, rather. I'm going to go ahead and adhere that right to the front of the stems. And then I will adhere my flowers to the tops of the stems. And this just creates such a pretty focal point. I love how beautiful those flowers look. They pop so much against that pattern paper too, that beautiful bold red. We're now going to move on to our sentiment. I have the new Mini Messages holiday stamp set here. I love a good linear sentiment. I think this is one of my favorite ways anyways to finish a card. I'm going to heat emboss it, so I did apply some anti-static powder, inked it up in Honeybee's clear embossing watermark ink. Then I went ahead and dipped it into some gold embossing powder, and then of course I will heat set with my heat tool. And there is the coordinating dies that came out earlier that will work for this sentiment set, so be sure to look out for those. And then I went ahead and trimmed it down and added foam adhesive to the backside of the sentiment, as well as all of my flowers and leaves and everything, basically all my die cuts. And then I went ahead and removed the backing, stuck them down to the card front. Now I'm just going to remove the backing on my sentiment and then place it over my focal point to complete my card. I'll hold it up here to the camera so you can get a good look. I love the way this flower turned out. They're so pretty. The leaves are gorgeous. I love that striping that we added to the the petals. I think that just adds a lot more interest and texture to the card. Hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If any questions about the products I use, please check out the link below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.